Go to the third group, number 5, 6 and 7. Taoiseach.
I propose to take questions 5 to 7 together. I was pleased to welcome the Grand Secretary of the Orange Order, Reverend Mervyn Gibson, and a delegation of Orange Order members from south of the border to government buildings on the 26th of November. Minister for European Affairs Helen McEntee also attended the meeting. We discussed issues affecting Orange Order members in Ireland, including Protestant schools, particularly in the border areas, and education in general, infrastructure and the cultural needs of Protestant communities in the border counties. We also discussed tourism projects, including further development of the Battle of the Boyne site and the possibility of developing a Williamite trail from Antrim to Aughrim, encouraging more people to visit these places. Further topics included orange halls and sporting and community facilities along the border region. The meeting also touched on Brexit, the withdrawal agreement, and the political declaration agreed at the European Council meeting in Brussels on the 25th of November.
The meeting. I thank the Taoiseach for his reply, and that I think the Taoiseach would also would be aware and knows that a process of systematically reaching out to the Orange Order has been in place for over 20 years now. And including during periods when orange marches were a dramatic source for tension in many more areas than they are today, thankfully. And I think in the forthcoming various commemorations and so on, historic commemorations, it's important to continue that contact with the Orange Order and with loyalism and unionism, as I did myself when I was Foreign Minister, to anticipate and to make sure that it's a shared history that can be objectively recalled with a view to enlighten and to inform people. The recent Atlas of the Irish Revolution, published by UCC, I think is a very, very good illustration of how this can be done in terms of different perspectives from different backgrounds and different traditions. And it's one I recommend to the House and indeed to the public generally, north and south, in terms of reaching some understanding of how different traditions approach history and approach milestones in their own traditional, in the development and evolution of their own political tradition and cultural tradition. I think the work of President McAleese was groundbreaking, and we should acknowledge that I think no subsequent gesture could even come close to the impact of our hosting a 12th of July event in Áras an Uachtaráin. So I think we have to keep progressing such ongoing interactions. But I think these meetings themselves are not at the core of what has been the gradual crumbling of relations between our government and loyalism and political unionism. Even the Taoiseach has now accepted that having Arlene Foster's phone number in his mobile is nothing compared to having a constructive relationship. And while a solid majority in Northern Ireland, Taoiseach, is against Brexit and is in favour of the deal reached last month, the majority of unionists, however, appear to believe that this situation is being used to undermine constitutional guarantees to them. This is something obviously reinforced by the attempt of one party, namely Sinn Féin, to directly and immediately use Brexit to undermine constitutional guarantees. Does the Taoiseach agree that the continued absence of the democratic institutions of the Good Friday Agreement is a major threat to stability and progress in Northern Ireland, something which should be a concern to all of us on this island? It's now 4 months since it was signalled to the media that a new initiative was underway to get the Executive and Assembly working.
Thank you, Deputy.
What happened to this initiative? And is it the case that the Government and all parties are still going to await the ultimate resolution of Brexit before embarking on any new initiative? And given that the original reasons for the collapse of the Executive and the Assembly was the Renewable Heat Initiative, we now know that both parties, including Sinn Féin, were involved in that and delaying its closure and so on. Surely there's a need, given Brexit, the imperative of Brexit, to get the Assembly and the Executive back up and running.
Now, who's next? Deputy Doherty.
I welcome the initiative and the return visit with the Orange Order to Parliament buildings in November, and I hope and can I ask you that there is there further engagement planned in terms of another series of meetings? I note from the official press release the The issue of Brexit was an issue that was discussed. Obviously, it was happening at a time when there was particular movements in terms of the withdrawal agreement, and I also note that the Orange Order themselves remained neutral in relation to the issue of Brexit. Can I ask the Taoiseach if he can enlighten us as to whether they offered an opinion as such, or has he had an opportunity to argue the merits of what was on the table at that point in time, and does he believe that there was any acknowledgement in relation to that? I've listened to Micheál Martin, who continues to snipe from the sidelines in relation to this, but maybe after the Christmas break he might consider whether he will or he won't, or whether he will or he won't contest elections in the north. It seems he can't make up his mind and actually play a constructive role in this. Again, he continues to put misinformation on the floor of this House in relation to the RHI scenario, where there is serious allegations of corruption coming from the DUP themselves. But then again, Micheál Martin and corruption and Fianna Fáil are quite, those parties and corruption are quite linked. So it's not surprising that he just continues to dismiss the core areas that surrounded it, and maybe as your silence was deafening, as former finance ministers in Taoiseach had bank accounts or money stashed under their beds and all the rest, and votes of confidence and all the rest. But look, I can rehearse all day about the corruption in the planning authorities and all of the rest that went on within Fianna Fáil. We can talk about the Mahon Tribunal, we can talk about all of that if you want, but the reality is that we have played a constructive role in relation to Brexit. We've made it very clear that it's not an orange or green issue. We have said in the absence of a deal, and we are committed to making sure that the withdrawal agreement goes through, and whatever influence we can use, we will use it in that regard to convince our European partners and those in the north to support the agreement. But obviously, in the context of a no agreement, there is a demand. There is a demand in the north, as we see from recent opinion polls, that the constitutional question can be put. Now, we have the United Ireland Party here, and we have the so-called Republican Party here, that actually won't breathe a word of Irish unity, despite the fact that Theresa May has talked about her union only surviving with consent, despite the fact that we have a Tory MP challenging the DUP in the House of Commons, that telling them that the people of the north are looking towards Irish unity, but dare not breathe a word of it in this House. So I would look forward, and I hope that Micheál Martin may take the Christmas period to reflect on actually playing a positive role and doing what your former deputy leader was arguing for, which is contest elections in the north. Put some skin in the game, stand in the north, and put your credentials out there, and let the people of the north decide, instead of sniping from the sidelines in a very dismissive and non-constructive way.
Deputy Burton.
Thank you. First of all, I want to commend the Taoiseach on his contacts with the Orange Order and the fact that he proposes to continue them. I think that's positive. I think the more dialogue we have on this island, the more we can bring people from different backgrounds, north and south, together in a democratic framework, and I think that's to be welcomed. Taoiseach, I would like to know, in relation to the preparations for the forthcoming commemorations over the next number of years, obviously we will be remembering and recalling some very difficult periods in our history when, to be honest, there were atrocities on both sides. There was, during my time in government and as Taoiseach, a committee of historians who were working very diligently in relation to the preparation of those particular commemorations that occurred in that period. And I think in relation to the commemoration of the 100 years of 1916, that was extremely well done, so that people gained an understanding of what was involved. As we look forward to commemorating or recalling and remembering about the Civil War, about the War of Independence and other events where, as I say, some terrible things happened on both sides, I want to know particularly, for instance, in relation to what happened in parts of the country, including particularly in areas like West Cork, where there was a strong feeling that Protestants were basically ultimately being forced out of that area. Have you given consideration? Have you asked the Committee of Historians to give consideration to how those events will be recalled, analysed, so that we can learn from it? And similarly, in relation to events which have taken place, in some cases almost recalling those terrible events in West Cork. And a former member of the Shannatyr, retired member of the Shannatyr, Owen Harris, has written about them and spoken at quite a number of venues, particularly in the West Cork area. Have you and your government given any consideration as to how we remember that? Because we really have to deal with the historical memories of both communities in order that we can bring people together. That's my view, and I think that's particularly important in relation to young people studying history and becoming familiar with the troubled history. Has the Orange Order, for instance, have they indicated any interest in being part of any commemorative and recall process?
I want to say I very much concur with Deputy Martin's remarks about the UCC Atlas of the Irish Revolution, which I think is a really excellent publication. It's the kind of book you'd like to spend a lot of time with if you could find the time, so maybe I'll spend a bit of time with it over the Christmas recess. And I also want to concur with him on what he said about the work of former President McAleese and also, of course, her husband Martin as well. I very much agree that the absence of an executive and assembly is a serious problem, a major deficiency at this time, both in terms of providing good government for people in Northern Ireland and also giving Northern Ireland a voice in these talks on Brexit. The other institutions are actually working quite well, both the British Irish Council and the British Irish Governmental Conference. In terms of a future initiative on putting the other institutions, the Northern Ireland institutions, into place, that really has to be done when the time is right. And both Taoiseach and I are of the view that the best time will be after the withdrawal agreement is ratified by Westminster, assuming it is, of course. But we're also conscious that there are elections coming up in May, local elections in Northern Ireland, and the difficulties that may arise from that. And we're aware, obviously, that the RHI inquiry is ongoing. So it's a case of trying to find the right time when the Irish government and the British government both feel that the two major parties are in the space that they might be able to compromise and come to an agreement. And the uncertainty around Brexit, I think, is a major difficulty when it comes to that, but it's not the only difficulty. RHI is too. Loss of trust between the two parties is as well, and also the impending elections in May. In terms of the Orange Order, it was my second engagement with the Orange Order. Visited them in Schomberg House a few months ago. Second engagement was in government buildings, and we plan a third engagement. There's no date yet set for it, but in principle I've agreed to visit an Orange Lodge in one of the border counties and meet with some people there and to use that as the opportunity. We did discuss the backstop, and it's not something that's supported by the Orange Order. They've taken the constitutional view that it treats Northern Ireland, or potentially could treat Northern Ireland, differently to Great Britain, and therefore it's something that they don't like. But we did have a very constructive and honest and good, mature, fact-based, thoughtful exchange on it, which I found very useful and very helpful to help me understand why they have a difficulty with it, and perhaps help to give them some understanding as to why I think it's necessary. So it's one of the ones on which we agreed politely to disagree. We did discuss commemorations, but not the ones that Deputy Burton refers to. They were particularly complimentary of the fact that the government had done a lot of work around the commemorations for the First World War. And in fact, they'd been to visit the haunted man, or the hunting man, in Stephen's Green before meeting me. It was actually the day it was being dismantled. And they did express a genuine recognition and appreciation of the fact that the government, and more than the government, that we as a society here south of the border are now, at least most of us, willing to acknowledge that part of our history and to recognise the sacrifice of those who died in the First World War. And I think that has actually helped at a time of strained relations. That has really helped. Something that they mentioned to me as well is the fact that they would, or suggested that perhaps we'd consider having a First World War memorial somewhere in central Dublin. Obviously we have Island Bridge, but perhaps having something in Merrion Square or Stephen's Green or somewhere more central, and I agreed to give that consideration. In terms of the commemorations more generally, obviously 2019 is the year of the first Dáil and the year of the democratic programme. The events around that are being very much led by the Oireachtas under the leadership of the Count Corla and others, and you'll be aware that an event will be held in the Mansion House in January, followed by a state reception there too. And that'll be an opportunity for us to recall the events of the first Dáil. I had an opportunity actually to read the transcript of the first Dáil, which was interesting reading. It's mostly in Irish and a somewhat different form of Irish than we use, but I was able to follow a lot of it, and it was interesting reading. What I found most interesting is that the first session of the first Dáil only went on for about 2 hours. There was a Dublin Fusiliers event that had the Mansion House booked that morning, and a Cayley that evening, so it was all kind of sandwiched in between the two. And of course the vast majority of members weren't present for one reason or another, some being in prison and some not being able to make it. But it's interesting actually to read it, because from history you think it's different to what it was, but it's Oh, thank you. But just to say that the expert advisory group under Maurice Manning does still exist, is still doing their work and advising us.